Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. So just a couple of housekeeping things here before we get started. We wanted to tell people, please feel free to ask questions in the questions tab that you can see. And I'll be recording these questions and saving them to ask David after the presentation is actually over. So we're very lucky today to be joined by David Tucker of Universal Mind. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Caroline. So we're going to be talking today, we're going to be using an example of going through the work that we did at Universal Mind with the DisArt Festival, just as a case study and as an example for how leveraging Convey, how it can be beneficial in similar situations. And today we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about kind of the initial thought that went into this. And if we want to talk about the technical specifics, that's what we're going to be doing in a follow-on webinar. So we have actually two parts to this. Again, today will be kind of an overview, our initial thought about kind of the architecture and how it was going to be created, our initial thought of the experience and the work that went into creating this unique experience, and then going into the technical specifics on the 28th, both around this application as well as kind of the demo example messaging application that we created on Convey. I'd have some articles about with that as well. So let me give everyone a little bit of a background, just so you understand kind of where we're coming at from Universal Mind and from the work that we do. So we are a digital transformation agency, and we create digital experiences across most any digital touch point. You know, that could be something like creating a genetics research platform that exists on the iPad and on the web, or some of the work that we've done to create, you know, kind of financial dashboards that can be viewed, you know, on the desktop, to loyalty apps that exist on the phone, to even things that are on wearable devices such as the Apple Watch or Google Wear. You know, for us, we look at just all of these digital touch points as a lens to which we can create an experience. And we've had a great opportunity that, you know, throughout the 12 years that we've been around to do it for a lot of great organizations. And my specific role within that is, you know, it's my job to really spend all day thinking about, you know, the different capabilities that we provide at Universal Mind, and then taking that to our clients and helping shape the way that they're thinking about these digital touch points that they're looking to create. You know, and as a part of this, I really enjoy getting out and talking at conferences and writing about the digital landscape that we're in. And so this is stuff that I get really, really excited about. And I've had the opportunity, you know, throughout my career to do a lot of work with a lot of great companies as well through my role at Universal Mind, and had the chance to, you know, be at some really cool conferences and write for some great publications. And so I can just tell you that what I'm sharing with you today is something that comes from experience maybe of doing things wrong the first time and learning over time, you know, how these things can be used properly in an amazing experience. And so if we begin to tie that in and think about the experience that we bring to Universal Mind, I'm also going to give you a little bit of background on something that you might not be familiar with, which is the DisArt Festival. And one of the quotes that I'll just give to kind of help frame this initial discussion, and then we'll dive in a bit deeper, is a quote that actually comes from the organizers of the DisArt Festival. It says, "The ultimate test of living in a community is found in our willingness to reach out and understand one another, to be willing to be vulnerable and to see the world from someone else's point of view. And art is one such catalyst that can provoke us into changing our perceptions and opinions." And that's part of the catalyst for the DisArt Festival. Now, just to give you a little bit of a background, there was an international exhibit called Art of the Lived Experiment, which was an international disability art display that originated in England. And there was a desire to bring this experience to the United States. And it seemed as though Grand Rapids was a perfect fit. And for any of you that are familiar with the Grand Rapids community, you know that art is just intertwined with the community, where you have great organizations there like the Urban Institute of Contemporary Arts and Kendall College of Art and Design. And so starting on April 10th, they brought in this international exhibit to these locations in Grand Rapids with the goal of really helping expose the work of artists who have disabilities. And in addition to showcasing that work, trying to make it accessible to anyone, irrespective of their level of physical ability. And so there were a lot of unique challenges that came just with the logistics of getting this festival to the United States. But then what we were really excited about was being able to think about how we can augment this experience of these great works of art with something digital. And we'll dive into that in a little bit as to what we actually did. But the overall mission statement of the DisArt Festival and DisArt in general is to change perceptions about disability one work of art at a time. And so, as I mentioned, Grand Rapids was kind of ground zero for allowing this to happen. And it took place the second half of April with this exhibit across multiple locations throughout Grand Rapids. So those locations were the Urban Institute of Contemporary Arts, which actually is just across the street from our office in Grand Rapids. It also took place at the Kendall College of Art and Design, which we also have a lot of connections with. Several of our senior user experience consultants at Universal Mind are actually professors at Kendall College of Art and Design. And then also the Grand Rapids Art Museum. And so you had all of these different works of art being displayed at these separate places throughout Grand Rapids. And the thought was, how do we create an experience? How do we build something that really allows this to come alive for the individuals that are coming to view the art? And so we really asked ourselves, why a digital experience? And what challenges would we have to overcome that would be a bit unique to this specific digital experience? So we began to think about, the kind of work that would be there and this kind of experience. And you're seeing here an example of once the art was actually installed. This is some of Catherine Sherwood's work. And we began to think about the challenge, right? Not only of really trying to bring a great light to these artists who have disabilities, but also, again, how to make it accessible to individuals who have disabilities to actually be able to go and experience it. So we knew that one of the first things we were going to have to do in shaping the way that we were thinking about this digital experience was we were going to have to do this from an accessibility first mindset. We've created a lot of things, a lot of digital experiences during our time at Universal Mind, and a lot of those have had big focuses on just making sure that these things are accessible. But in a lot of cases, for a lot of projects, maybe accessibility wasn't the leading factor, and this one was different because it was such a crucial element. We need to make sure that we were considering this above most everything else that we were doing. And here's the other interesting thing, and this isn't a challenge that's just unique to accessibility, and this is a challenge that we've also tackled in several different ways, but we needed to be able to effectively connect digital users with the physical space. So users were going to have an application of some sort, they were going to have it on a device, and they needed to be able to seamlessly move throughout an actual space that had real pieces of art placed all throughout it, and they needed to be able to stay connected with that physical space on their digital device. And so there were unique challenges that we had to overcome to make that happen. So diving into it, we chose Convey, as I'm sure you probably would guess, to be in essence the entire platform that we built this application on top of. And we talk about this when we talk about it in terms of enabling innovation at the experience layer. So let me dive into that and explain a little bit of what that means. But to really understand our perception, we're going to need to even take a step back from what we created, and let's talk a little bit about digital touch points in general. So let's think of any digital touch point. So let's, everyone here has probably used different mobile applications. You have apps like, Facebook and Uber that probably a lot of people have had a chance to use at some point. So let's talk about what these digital touch points need. Well, holistically, a digital touch point is going to need several things. First, there's going to be some aspect of data, some aspect of cloud-based data that's going to be generated by the use of this application. And then there's going to be files associated with that, right? So if we think, for example, if you're using Instagram and you're actually taking your own photos and those actually get pushed to their servers, or you're pulling those photos down to view those from other people, there's going to be a concept of files that need to be stored somewhere. And also, in addition to that, there's going to be the concept of a user. So this data that exists, this cloud-based data, these cloud-based files, in a lot of cases, they're tied to the user. For example, if you're using the Uber app and you actually have information about your preferred payment methods and your preferred type of car that you like to request, these things are associated not with everyone, they're associated with you specifically. So digital touchpoints need a concept of a user, but you also don't want that information to be made available to just anyone. So there's also an aspect of the security that gets tied in with that. So along with the user comes security. And then digital touchpoints also need some aspect of real-time notifications. And you can think of, again, using the Uber application, you get a notification as the driver's getting near you. So you have that aspect. Then you also begin to tie in some other pieces, right? So some pieces that change the way that the platform acts. So in some cases, this can be tying in elements of the user's context, such as the location, and maybe the application then can do some location-specific queries. You then tie in some level of configuration. So if I am a user and I'm using the Uber application, what happens when I enter in a new preferred payment method? Maybe it's going to shoot me an email to let me know that the preferred payment method has changed on my account to verify that this is something that I wanted to have happen. But then we're also going to need to integrate with existing data. Most applications, especially applications for larger companies, are going to tie into some similar pieces of data. If I'm a large enterprise and I'm wanting to create some internal applications for my employees, I'm not going to want them to have to create a completely different login for every single mobile app that I create. I'm going to want this to integrate with the same system, maybe Active Directory, for example, that users would be using for anything else within my company. And then you're also going to have the concept of needing to be able to measure everything that happens within the application, so kind of the concept of insights and analytics. So that's really, if we boil down the supporting platform for most any digital touch point, it's going to contain these items. So I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about a book that was recently released from HBR Press called Leading Digital. And one of the things that they talk about in this book is the concept of a dual speed IT structure. So normally within existing organizations, IT operates at a stability mode. The core of their job is to create services and platforms and databases that are stable, that don't change rapidly, but that are able to support other platforms. The thing that's different that a lot of organizations have had a hard time making the shift is understanding that in and of itself doesn't work in the mobile age if that's all an organization is doing. So we know just by looking at statistics and research that there's an expectation from users in the iOS App Store, and we'll just use that as kind of an example for us moving forward, that in the iOS App Store, the apps that do the best are ones that have anywhere between a 4 and 8 week release cycle. A lot of traditional enterprise organizations that have a traditional IT group, they're looking at 6-month or 12-month release cycles or even quarterly release cycles. So it's a dramatic shift to do this kind of continual deployment, continual change to where you're updating an experience every 4 to 8 weeks. And so what we're talking about here is now separating out two pieces. There still is the core piece that has to focus on stability within organizations. But there's also now another piece that needs to focus on continually taking in user feedback and modifying and improving an experience iteratively over time. So one of the things we talk about when we talk about this is that innovation should happen at the experience layer and not the platform layer. So let me break that down and explain what I mean there. This kind of rapid, gathering user feedback and making changes and creating an experience based on that really happens at kind of the top 33% of the whole stack, right? So we have some pieces in the back. We have, our core services and the data and all the stuff that needs to interact with that. And then we also have, let's just take the iOS app as an example. We also then have some code that exists in iOS that manages the process of going and fetching this data, of tying it to the user, of ensuring that security is followed. All of these things, that consists of the platform. Then you have the end user experience that exists on top of all of that. So again, using Uber as an example, the process by which you actually go through and you set your location and you request a car to come to you, and then it notifies you when that car is there, and then where it updates you throughout the process of your trip and then completes the trip. All of that really happens at that initial experience layer. And organizations need to be set up so that that layer can be continually refined. But organizations also need to be set up so that that platform is stable. And organizations, might look at this and say, yeah, that's a great idea, but I don't have the ability to go take, a year to take my IT team kind of out of what they're doing and try to build this kind of platform on which things can be based. And that's a challenge that a lot of people have faced. But, again, probably not surprisingly, for this talk, this is where MBAS begins to become a key component. So again, MBAS stands for Mobile Backend as a Service. And this literally provides that kind of platform on which experiences can be built. And in a lot of cases, it's going to rest on top of existing things that an organization already has. So maybe there's kind of an API layer, and this can sit right on top of that and enable that kind of mobile engagement tier within the overall architecture. And we're not the only ones that see value in this, right? Gartner looked at the trends to see where things were going, and they said that by 2016, 80% of mobile applications will leverage cloud backend as a service in some manner. So we took all of this thought around how Convey can fit in, and then we began to think about how this could tie into UICA. Now, there's a lot of reasons why people can use MBAS solutions. So for some organizations, like I talked about, it's more of a play to begin to implement kind of a holistic digital transformation and enable more rapid experiences to be created on top of a solid platform. But for us in this case, this was something that we chose to be involved in. This was a cause that we valued. And so we chose to put our people on the ground, and we knew that we were going to have to spend a lot of time innovating on that experience layer. So we wanted to leverage Convey to be able to provide that solid platform from day one. So let's talk a little bit here about what we created. So if we look at this application, and I'm actually it's going to walk through the application as I'm talking. We created a digital experience initially for iOS. We wanted to create an experience that allowed users to be able to interact with the art in a unique way, but not only just to get the story of the art, but to really begin to pull out the story of the artist, because that's so crucial for this use case. And so here's an example of an artist here, Tony Heaton, and his Gold Lame piece that we were able to walk users through the process of not only how it was created, but giving some background around him, and began to tie all this into a single application. And I'm going to break down some of the specific ways that we leverage Convey and the thought process that went into how we created an experience that both was accessibility first, but also connected users to a physical space through the application. So we're going to kind of dive into some specifics around that. And the first piece that I really want to talk about, because I think it's an exciting space, is the work with proximity. And let me explain what I mean by that. So users, when we talk about contextual design, we talk about a user's context, what we mean is understanding specific things about a user as they're engaging with a digital experience. And I often talk about it in terms of facets. So for example, if you go to a mobile website for, let's just throw out an example of Home Depot, they're going to use your location context so that when you go to the site, they're going to grab the information about your location from the GPS on your phone, if you allow it, and they'll present you with, at the top of that page, the closest store to you and what the hours are. And I think the location context has been the piece of this that most individuals have experienced. There are a lot of either mobile applications, and Uber being one of them, or even mobile websites that will access your location context to give you some specific piece of information or to tailor the experience to you. But what we're seeing is if we really want to connect users in a physical space, we can't just rely on location context. And there's multiple reasons for this. In some cases, we need to know where the user is, and a couple of feet actually matter to see whether they're in one place versus another. And so there are some technical limitations that exist. But in general, we're really not concerned when we're inside of a physical space on where the user is. We're more concerned about what they're near. So a key element in any digital plus physical interaction is understanding the user's proximity context. So that's just a nice way of framing up saying of what they're near. And so one of our creative directors has an amazing quote that I think just really ties into this well. He said, we've always had this intimate awareness of our surroundings, and now our surroundings have an intimate awareness of us. So now we can walk into spaces that can begin to track what we're near in the ability to customize an experience for us directly. So let's talk a little bit about that. We've done work at Universal Mind for some time on proximity-based experiences. And so here's an example that we did, Project Occupied, where we began to track kind of some of the open and available seats within our Grand Rapids office, which is kind of a free-form space where people can just go in and grab a seat, and there's not any assigned seats. And so there was a need to track what seats were vacant and what seats were open. And so we used some iBeacons to quickly go in and set up an experience to manage this. And it really was a unique experience in that it enabled us to, for the first time, really begin to experiment with this in a real space and understand the power of how it could be used in other spaces. And this tied in directly to some of the work that we were planning to do here for the DisArt Festival at the different locations. And so we actually took this and took the experience that we gained through this experiment, and we began to tie it into the physical locations such as UICA. So we began to take, if you look here on the left, you can see something actually affixed to the wall that's blue, and that's an actual iBeacon from Estimote that we actually used for this application. And on the right, you can see the hanging work of art from Jeremy Burleson, all these different lamps that he creates. And we wanted to be able to use these beacons as a way to basically reveal to users the works of art that they were near. And here you can see another example where we actually had one installed near Tony Heaton's Gold LeMay piece as well. And we had these placed all throughout and near the different pieces that were being displayed as a part of the festival. So let's look at what a beacon is, because I think a lot of people have heard the term. It's certainly become a buzz term over the last year, but let's dive into the specifics of what does a beacon consist of? So if we go and we begin to look at an example Estimote beacon, and again, all of them can be slightly different, but we're going to use Estimote as an example here. So if we actually break this apart, this really consists of 4 different pieces. And the core, the front and the back are really just enclosures. They're both silicone, and the one on the back actually has an adhesive on it. But then we really get into kind of the juicy part of this. So there's, in essence, a very small ARM-based processor and Bluetooth low-energy radio and a set of sensors that exist inside of the beacon. And then this is all powered by, in essence, what is just a large watch battery. Now, the reason that Bluetooth low energy is so crucial for this is it does have to do with that LE portion, low energy. With traditional Bluetooth devices, so for example, if you've ever used maybe a Bluetooth headset when you're exercising, or you've used a Bluetooth headset for your phone, or you've used a Bluetooth speaker, all of those kind of fall under traditional Bluetooth, Bluetooth 2, 2.x and below, and the problem is that requires a constant connection with your mobile device. So in keeping that constant connection open, both the phone and the device have to be in kind of a constant transmit and receive mode. Bluetooth low energy really changed the game because it enables this connection that can kind of come and go, and so it can keep the user, it can keep both the beacon itself and the mobile device from draining their battery very quickly. And so through that, you can create experiences that the user can just keep Bluetooth on and just walk through a location and be able to get some different triggers that are triggered as they walk near specific things. And this is what really enables the proximity context to be monitored by a mobile device and beacons. So there's also other pieces to this. So Estimote, it's probably a leader in beacons and probably the leader right now. They actually also have some configuration options. So beacons themselves can have some different pieces of data tied to them. There's kind of just some IDs and stuff. The important thing to understand about beacons, though, is that beacons are only one-way communication, right? So your phone can detect if you're near a beacon, but the beacons themselves, they don't transmit anything other than a couple small pieces of information that are just IDs that you can use to track it. But then you can hook this into your application and make the application do different things when certain beacons are triggered. Estimote also gives you a lot of configuration around the ranging interval, around kind of the strength of the signal that's being sent out, and that also allows you to have a predictive time for your battery life. So for us, in this case, the DisArt Festival really went the second half of April. We didn't have to worry as much about long-term battery life, but if you're looking to deploy beacons in a retail setting, which we've had some good experiments with those as well, knowing how often you have to change the batteries or put in new beacons is certainly an important piece as well. But we were able to take this information, the proximity context, and integrate it into the application so that as you were near a specific piece of art, you could begin to get triggers that would actually visually alert you to the pieces of art that you were near. And we actually took this even further for accessibility, but I'll talk about that more in just a bit. So the next piece that I want to take a look at is content. Because in addition to creating this experience, we really needed to think about all the content that exists. And as I've shown you some pieces of the application, this could be something such as the images of the artist, the bio information of the artist, the images of the pieces of art, and some of the descriptions of the pieces of art, audio for some of these things. We'll talk about why we used audio in a bit. So there was a lot of content that had to be created and maintained through this. Now, normally for an organization, we could have looked to set up an initial, some sort of content management system from day one, but we knew in this case, first of all, we needed to have this done quickly, and we also wanted to keep it done in such a way that we could access this from other platforms if there was a need. We ended up only doing an iOS app, but the way it was created, because we leveraged Convey, we could have actually pulled this into any other platform. So we really needed to allow for not only rapid iteration on the end user experience, but also iteration with the application content. And so one of the features of Convey that proved to be very useful for us is just the ability to directly go in and view and then edit the data within the console, which basically provided us with a very kind of base content management system from day one. So the day we started working, we could begin to set up our data model and allow people who are managing the content to go in and work with that. Now, this specific screenshot from the console actually comes from the demo that we did on Convey for a messaging application, and we'll be talking a lot more about that in the next webinar on the 28th. And also, again, the ability to tie in business logic to this. And again, this is something we'll dive into really the kind of the technical side of what that is and how that works in the next webinar. But again, the Convey console gave us that capability from day one to really begin to separate out the content from the experience itself and allow individuals who are maintaining the content to go in and make changes and begin to moderate that and to create content that was equally as compelling as the application that it would be presented in. And then element 3, which is accessibility. Now I'm going to just kind of take a little bit of a step back from the UICA app in general and talk a little bit about just the challenges that exist with understanding users in general. I think we can look at accessibility as a very key and important piece that every organization needs to understand, but in essence, it's also a piece of just understanding your users. So we believe at Universal Mind that we need to research our users in context. Right? And so what we're not talking about here from a user research perspective is just, shooting out a bunch of surveys and letting people fill those out. While that can provide us value, in a lot of cases we find that there's a lot of things that we miss in the process. But if we can actually stand next to or sit with a user who actually is interacting with an experience, we begin to gain insight that we wouldn't have otherwise. Things that our EVP of strategy calls these unknown observables. And sometimes if you're researching users, it might take you to some strange places. So we had a chance, for example, to work with a company that did a lot of genetic studies, and they were actually building a platform for experts in the field. And that required us to actually go and spend time with those experts to understand. And then through that process, we can gain an understanding of our users and what their abilities are through these user segments that can then develop into user personas. And as we do that, and as we begin to understand these users, we can begin to actually map out the way that they're interacting with the experiences that we create. And this is the same challenge that we're faced with accessibility. And I think I was blown away as we got into this project of understanding how far some of this goes. So let me just give you a few statistics. So within the US, there are over 8.1 million individuals that have some sort of a vision impairment. There's over 19.9 million users that have some level of difficulty grasping or lifting. And there are 7.6 million that have some sort of a hearing impairment. And we could just take this and go even further. We could go through all the statistics of all the different areas of disability as we did when we initially got onto this project. But the key thing here to understand is this is not a small and limited problem, and I fear that a lot of organizations look at accessibility as an afterthought, as opposed to looking at it as a key group of users that they need to understand and adapt what they're creating to help match those needs. So let's take a look at the application again as we created it. Again, it was an iOS app that was universal, so it worked across both the phone and the iPad. And the creative director on this project, Christian Saylor, did a lot of work to begin to think about how we need to customize the experience with the understanding of the users that had the disabilities that would be going to experience the art. So for example, if we look at something simple like the size of buttons, we had to change the size of buttons to be larger, knowing that there were individuals with low muscle tone who maybe couldn't always guarantee that they could hit exactly on a certain spot. And we had to begin to think about the way our text was presented, both in the size and contrast to the background. So when we included the titles here for UICA and the Grand Rapids Art Museum and the Kendall College of Art and Design, we really created kind of high contrast text that was, again, much larger than we normally would have included, so that the individuals that actually had a vision impairment could easily discern what the text was. And another interesting piece of this, when we began to look at transitions and how we would actually transition from one screen to another, we actually ended up taking some of our initial design out because we wanted to keep it very easy for individuals with a vision impairment to follow the actual flow of the application and not create anything in excess. And when we began to talk about the proximity, this is where I feel is one of the areas where the community as a whole that are developing experiences with sensors, they haven't fully capitalized on how it can truly augment the experience for individuals that might have some level of a disability. So when we created this application with the proximity sensors included, we actually triggered it so that if you're an individual who's just holding the mobile device, as you get close to a specific piece of art, that piece of art, again, it'll actually show you the visual indicator, but then it will actually automatically open that for you if you stand there for a certain period of time. The reason is again, because of individuals with low muscle tone, they might not have the ability to continually click through and click deeper into a specific piece of information. So if we can do some of that for them, that helps them with the way that they actually experience it. And then for individuals that maybe have kind of a vision impairment that really prevent them from reading a lot of this text, especially some of the smaller text, when we get into the bios and other things about the art, we actually included audio cues as well. So you can see as I actually click through this that we actually can see when we navigate to a specific artist, for example, we actually can hit the play button and we can begin to get those audio cues that are included as well. So as we kind of wrap this up and thinking about this experience as a whole, I think it was a great example for how we leveraged Convey as a platform to really enable us to have that solid base on which to build this experience, and we had it from day one. And what that enabled us to do was spend a lot of time focusing on really understanding the users, understanding the content, and then tying all this together with proximity-based sensors that really enabled us to connect these digital users with a physical space. And again, Convey was a huge part of that for us. And it was an exciting project. And it was great to actually have a lot of individuals go through this and experience this this display of art in a unique way. And it's one of the more fun things we've had the opportunity to do over the last few months. So as Caroline mentioned, I know that we're going to have a chance to actually go through some questions. So feel free to take a minute and write in any questions that you might have in the questions panel. And then in just a minute, we'll go ahead and start taking those questions.
Thanks so much, David. So we've got a couple of questions already. One of them is from Washington, and he asks if you could talk more about the proximity context, specifically in terms of the spatial context versus the mobile marketing context.
Sure. I think here a lot of people misunderstand beacons, and they misunderstand the proximity context in that they simply look at it as an avenue to say, oh, a user's near here, now I can shoot them a tailored notification of some sort that maybe relates to a product or a sale or a coupon or something like that. And I think what a lot of people miss is, in a lot of ways, you get one shot with users to show, especially with proximity, that you can provide value. So users aren't, in most cases, looking for just getting bombarded with information as they walk through a retail establishment, for example. They're not looking for more notifications. What they're looking for is something that provides value to them and some level of customization over that. So if, for example, if you're walking through a museum, kind of like the example that we had, and you want to be able to receive kind of some customized content that helps you navigate that, maybe it's, hey, here's 3 new pieces of art that are new since the last time you were here as a user. Then you can tie in things like the user and their preferences and their history, and you can give them information that's actually relevant. You know, saying, hey, here's 15% off in the gift store when you leave is something, again, that users don't see as being extremely valuable. And in a lot of situations, they'll actually go in and turn off the ability for an application to be able to either use their location, which is tied to proximity, or they'll actually just turn off Bluetooth, or they'll turn off notifications for the app. So again, it's constantly figuring out how are we going to provide value to the users through this experience. And I think that in a lot of ways, MarTech in general, so marketing technology, is a little bit behind in this, because most all of the examples that you see from a MarTech perspective are only about pushing notifications. So again, and Convey provides a great basis for just building an experience, and again, you can tie some of this back into the platform, and then build an experience and do whatever you want with the beacons, right? So there's a lot that can be done with that.
Okay, great. I've got another question, which is the application reusable for other exhibits that the museum will have?
Sure, that's a great question. And we built this one specific for the DisArt Festival, but that being said, the museum could certainly turn around. I mean, obviously we would change some aspects of this, and one piece we didn't get into here with the creation of the DisArt Festival app, but we could have done, and we even talked about it, was we could take all of the runtime assets, like the logo for the festival. We could take even the names of the locations. We could have made all of those data-driven. So we could have created new models within the Convey data store for, locations, for example, and we could have added in locations and created a relationship inside of those locations to the pieces of art, and then created a relationship for the pieces of art to the beacons. We could have made all of that something that was that we could configure through the data store, and then made it truly reusable. I mean, you could even you can make it into an entire platform for museums in general if you wanted to. So you do have that ability with Convey. We didn't do that in this specific use case. This was a cause we believed in. We actually took our individuals and put them on the ground for this, and so we really were looking to really just maximize the work around accessibility with this. But yes, this certainly could have been done that way with the platform.
Excellent. Another question that kind of goes off of that one is how easy is it for the museum administrators to update or change information if they needed to?
It's a great question. And that kind of ties back to where I was talking about how to rapidly iterate on this content. So we could have, let's just say we were doing this without Convey. We could have gone through and actually, used some cloud data store and built this up, and then had to go in and build kind of a content management layer on top of it, either with an existing content management platform, or we could have just built up some custom web forms for them to do it. But what the console enabled us to do, again, was really to have that ability to have them go in and manage this content on day one. So they could go in, for example, and say, well, we've tweaked this specific artist's bio to be able to highlight some more of the work that went into the specific pieces of art that they created, or tailoring, some of the pictures. So, once we actually had the art installed, they could get some better pictures maybe than they had before. And so, and again, enabling them to have access to that through the console was really huge in the process, because we could start on day one and start putting in content, and then we could hand it off to them and say, okay, now you can actually go in and make changes as needed, while we were still building out the application. So the console played a big role in that.
Excellent. So next question is, which mobile platforms does it work for?
Sure. So this specific application, we actually built this with a specific target. So one of the things I didn't get into here was The team at UICA actually had a large collection of iPads that they were going to use for this. And so for individuals that walked in the door, maybe they didn't have an iOS app, but they really wanted to use that to help experience it, they were actually going to be able to hand those out at the door and then collect them as they left. And so kind of in a rare situation, we were able to identify a single platform. However, that being said, with the Convey SDK, we could have easily built the same platform on Android. We could have built a web variant that was maybe used as a hybrid mobile application. There were a lot of different ways that we could have interacted with the data. We just had a specific use case here where we really could create just an iOS app and have it be something that would be viable for all the people that were visiting the experience.
And I think this is a question that I think that we've probably talked about this a little bit, but just to maybe reiterate a little bit, the question is, does UICA have to host a stack of their own?
It's a great question. So in this case, UICA is actually leveraging the multi-tenant option with Convey. So they don't have to host this themselves. All of this and all the maintenance of keeping these servers up and running that are supporting this experience is something that Convey is actually doing in this case, and they don't have to worry with, which is big, especially considering UICA and the other organizations involved. They're not huge organizations that have huge IT groups within them. But it's also great in knowing that for those large organizations that do have those large IT groups, if they need to, whether it's for regulatory reasons or other things, they could actually host this themselves with the on-premise option.
Other questions that these two kind of go together. So one is how quickly was the application made, and how much longer would it have taken to make it from scratch?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that at least the second half is a little. We'll talk a little bit about it. It's a little hard to answer exactly, but if I remember correctly, I think this was about 6 weeks from beginning to end. Maybe a little bit longer when you factor in some of the research that we did and the research that went into it. But the core development piece after we had that initial design in place, I believe, was about 6 weeks. If we built it from scratch, we certainly would have had to have brought some additional individuals onto the team. We would have had to have done the work to set up the cloud instances that we'd be interacting with. We'd have to build in that kind of API layer and ensure that we had that security that's integrated with it, and then we'd have to build all of that in on the mobile side for every platform, which again in this case would have only been one, but for other experiences would have certainly been multiple platforms. You would have had to do it for iOS and Android and mobile web, so on and so forth. So we certainly saved quite a bit of time. I mean, we could have very easily doubled the amount of time it took us, or at least double the number of hours it would have taken us to build this if we'd actually done it from scratch.
Excellent. Next question is, what other verticals or industries do you see Convey and iBeacon specifically facilitating a competitive advantage or a better user experience?
Sure, I think that's a great question as well. And I think that let's talk a little bit first about just beacons in general, and then we'll dive into kind of the more general, just the Convey as a platform and where it's useful. But beacons right now, again, have the ability to help transform the experience for anywhere that's trying to connect a digital experience with a physical space. So that can be, again, universities. It can be, large things like sports arenas. Both Major League Baseball, for example, has done a lot of work in putting iBeacons in all of their locations. It can be, universities where individuals maybe need to be guided through specific places. So we've seen beacons in use quite a bit in a lot of different locations. And retail, again, is kind of the natural choice. But I think retail maybe is only where it really begins. I think there's a lot more valuable things that can happen long term. Even hospitals, right? Even the ability to be able to guide users to specific locations within a hospital and guide them through certain processes is something that would be really unique that could be facilitated with iBeacons. When we talk about Convey as a platform, I think the unique thing here is, there certainly are some verticals that maybe are right for this. I think a lot of organizations that are looking to looking at digital transformation, and they're trying to figure out how to facilitate a platform that helps them maybe create mobile experiences across a wide variety maybe of operating companies and different business units, and there's really kind of a mobile team that's kind of supporting all this. Convey can be huge for those, because one of the things that Convey can do is provide kind of a base level of standards for how you interact with any piece of data within your organization from a mobile experience. So instead of going in and maybe you have one vendor create an experience over here and another vendor create an experience over here and then an internal team create it here, and all of them are doing things in different ways. When you begin to interject Convey into the process, again, sitting on top of kind of that API layer within an organization, you can really have a standard through using the specific SDKs for how you would interact with anything, including security through the user, how you pull specific pieces of data from existing data stores or from the Convey data store. There's a lot of opportunity there within those kind of organizations. And I think the other thing I would say is, for organizations that are starting small, maybe it's a startup or maybe it's just small businesses that really maybe feel that they're a little bit behind. In those use cases, it becomes kind of an innovation engine for them just to get this and put it in place. And now, instead of, again, building this from scratch, they've got a platform that they can start to build off of immediately, which is huge because organizations that size don't have the ability or the money or the ability to wait to be able to put those things in place themselves.
Excellent. All right, so I've just got one question. I think that this question kind of wraps it up nicely. So what kind of feedback did the artists have about the synergy of the end result?
Sure. We actually had some great experiences in talking with the artists and talking with the organizers and walking a lot of individuals just from the community around. And I think the feedback that we had was good feedback overall. Now, we also learned, and I think this is a good learning experience for anyone who's building an experience for individuals that have that need some level of accessibility. We didn't necessarily hit every disability, right? There are certain disabilities and certain ability sets that we maybe could have even done more for. And so I think that just kind of gives us even more encouragement to continue doing that deep research of users and understanding how we can improve future experiences so that, again, individuals, irrespective of their level of ability, can experience these things in person.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, on behalf of all of us at Convey, I just want to say a huge thank you to David. This was really excellent, and I think it gave people a very deep look at the application you built and exactly why and how it works. And we're looking forward to next week diving into the technical details of how all these pieces come together. So hopefully, to those of you who are on the webinar, that we'll see you next week. And please feel free to spread the word. We will also be sending out an email afterwards that has the replay, and hope to hear some feedback. If you've got any feedback, you can send it to webinars@convey.com, and we'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks a lot, David.